Okay, it's good to be back. So tonight's shiur is dedicated Le'ilui Nishmas Krena Bas Shalom and L'Havdil Ben Chaim L'Chaim. It's also for a refuah shlema for Leah Bas Tema and Rivka Penina Bas Krena. If you would like to dedicate a shiur, please be in touch. Your sponsorship enables the shiurim to continue. Sorry, I just want to put that off. So a shepherd was tending to his flock when he sees a dust of cloud approaching, a cloud filled with dust, approaching at a high speed. And out of it emerges a shiny silver BMW. And the driver, a young man wearing an Armani suit, the latest Ray-Bans, and his tightly knotted power tie, pokes his head out the window and says, "Hey," he says, "if I can tell you how many sheep you have, can I have one of them?" The shepherd looks at his peacefully grazing flock and looks at the young man and says, "Sure." So the man flips open his MacBook, he takes out his iPhone, turns it into hotspot, and on his computer, he gets to the sat-nav system and he initiates a scan of the entire area. While he's waiting, he sends an email. When he gets a response, he nods quite solemnly, and then he reads through the 150-page report that this program's produced, and he skims through it, gets to the end, and says, "You have exactly 1,586 sheep." Shepherd says, "Impressive. One of my sheep are yours." And he watches as the man bundles the animal into the car, and then he says, "If I can tell you what profession you are, can I have my animal back?" So the young man, pleased to meet a fellow sportsman, said, "Sure." Without hesitation, the shepherd said, "You're a consultant." "Hey," said the young man, "how did you guess that?" The shepherd said, "It wasn't a guess. You come into my field uninvited. You ask me to pay you for information I already know. You answer questions I haven't asked, and you know nothing about my business. Now give me back my dog." So now we know what a consultant does. I can say things like this without apologies because I worked as a fundraising and marketing consultant. But what does a shepherd do? So I actually Googled the job description of a shepherd. What would we do without Google? We could go through our entire lives without knowing the job description of a shepherd. But fear not, I'm about to edify you. Let me read it to you. Day-to-day care of the flock. A shepherd provides the basics: food, water, shelter, and protection. He knows what food is best for his flock in every season and where to find it. He plans the construction of the sheepfold and erects short-term shelter while in the field. He foresees danger. The shepherd trains the flock to know and follow his voice. This is his first line of defense. To wayward sheep, he administers discipline and takes preventative measures to correct fatal tendencies. He researches and develops methods and measures to improve the present flock and prepares for future flock needs. He leads and guides the flock. Because sheep tend to overgraze, the shepherd moves them on to fresh pasture. To do this, he may have to lead them through danger, enemies within, pests, and without, bandits, hazards, wind and weather, and obstacles, mountains and gorges. Here his experience is a prime factor. He knows what to do and how to proceed in dangerous situations. Overseas, the flock is the focus of the shepherd. He's responsible for their physical well-being, so he sets the pace, aware of the particular needs of each sheep. Some may be pregnant, there may be inexperienced and frisky lambs, stubborn young rams, and older or sickly sheep needing extra attention. And then, of course, the wayward, who oppose everything, even their best interests. Shepherds study the breed. He learns the strengths, weaknesses, and personality of each one. Whether his flock is few or thousands, his responsibilities never let up. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, year in and year out, the shepherd cares for and shares the life of his sheep. I don't know about you, but when I think of a shepherd, I get a warm, fuzzy feeling. I don't know, I think of Heidi, little Bo Peep, Mary had a little lamb, and even L'Havdil Alf Avdalis to make a total separation. But we find there are so many shepherds in Tanakh. Hevel, Abel, the Avos, our forefathers, the Shvatim, the 12 sons of Yakov. Moshe was a shepherd, King David was a shepherd, and there's a beautiful Midrash that Moshe was tending to his father-in-law's sheep one day, and all of a sudden, one little sheep bolted, and Moshe ran running after him, and he found the sheep by a pool of water, and he was drinking. And Moshe said so tenderly, "Gosh, I had no idea you were so thirsty. You must be so tired from having to run all this distance." And he picks the sheep up, puts him on his shoulders, and he takes the sheep, carries the sheep that way back to the flock. And Hashem says, if this is how he cares for the sheep of man, then he is definitely fit to shepherd mine. However, Rabbi Fran notes the following. Rav Chama ben Bar Chanina states, there is no more disgusting profession than that of a shepherd. Today we might think, what's the worst profession to have? I don't know. I think maybe when I see the people cleaning the sewers, going under the road and cleaning out all the sewage, I think perhaps that's the worst job. But in the days of Chazal, a shepherd was the lowest of the low in terms of a way to make a living. He had to be there in the boiling heat of the summer, in the freezing cold of winter, with smelly animals, and he was all alone. It's a disgusting profession. Why then does David HaMelech, does King David, in Perek 23, in Psalm 23, in the most famous of all our TEHILLIM, compare Hashem to a shepherd? Wouldn't we be surprised if we read TEHILLIM saying, Mizmor LeDavid, Hashem is my sewage cleaner? Indeed, the Midrash says that it's an insult to call Hashem a shepherd. It then explains that David HaMelech, that King David, had a precedent. In the blessing that Yakov Avinu gives Yosef at the beginning of this week's parsha, he says, Hashem before my forefathers Abraham and Yitzchak walked, and Hashem who shepherds me from my inception until this day. When Yakov referred to Hashem as a ro'eh, as a shepherd, it was a revolutionary expression. Until this point, Hashem had never been called a shepherd before, not Abraham, not Yitzchak, not Yakov until this point. The Midrash says that although the profession was an unseemly one, because Yakov referred to Hashem as a shepherd, that set a precedent that David could now call Hashem a shepherd. But according to the Midrash, had Yakov not called Hashem a shepherd, then David would not have been able to do so, because calling Hashem a shepherd would have been a derogatory term. Calling Hashem a shepherd there was a radical metaphor. As we said, it had never been called, Hashem had never been called a shepherd before, and David's entire justification was because Yakov called him a shepherd. The question then becomes, why is Yakov Avinu the first person to call Hashem a shepherd? And why specifically now does he introduce this new depiction of Hashem? Yakov was on his deathbed. He calls his children in and he's about to bless them. This is one of the last moments that he's going to have to speak to his children. Why now does he decide to break new ground and refer to Hashem as a shepherd? What's the meaning of this? Rav Matisyahu Solomon comments on a verse in last week's parasha. And when Yakov comes and meets Paro asks him, how old are you? And Yakov answers 130. And then he says something that Pharaoh doesn't explicitly ask. And he says, few and bad have been the days of the years of my life. Now, this is a very strange dialogue. Firstly, Pharaoh's question of how old Yakov is seems very inappropriate, if not downright rude, to ask to his distinguished foreign guest. And Yaakov's response is equally puzzling. Why does he complain to Pharaoh? The Ramban explains that Yakov was primarily explaining rather than complaining. Yakov looked very old, much older than his years. And so Pharaoh was actually just astonished to see such an old-looking man, because people didn't actually live that long. I mean, Yakov looked as if maybe he was pushing 200. So Paro was startled by this peculiar sight. And without thinking about diplomatic protocol, he's just so startled, he just blurts out, OMG, do you need Botox? And Yakov explains, and he says, no. He says, I'm actually only 130 years old. It's just that I've had such a hard life. That's why I look so much older than I actually am. Now let's call a spade a spade. Yakov did have a hard life. I mean, if we think of just some of the things, his brother Esav wanted to kill him. He was away from his family for so many years. He was tricked into marrying Leah. He had to work for another 7 years for Rachel, who had already worked for 7 years. Lavan constantly tried to deceive him with his wages. There was the whole issue. Dinah was raped by Shem, and then he faced a threat after Shimon and Levi took revenge on Shem. Rachel died. He thought Yakov was killed at the age of 17. And yet, the Das Kainim claims that it's still not proper for a Jew to speak this way, for a Jew to utter the words, few and bad have been the days of the years of my life. A Jew does not talk like that. The heavenly response, so to speak, was, you're complaining about your life? I saved you from Esav. I saved you from Lavan. I returned Dinah to you. I returned Yosef to you. How can you complain that your life was bad? The Midrash says that the number of words that Yakov uttered in the statement of complaint, 33 words, because of that, his life was cut short by 33 years. Rav Matisyahu Solomon explains that Yakov is now on his deathbed, and he's doing a cheshbon hanefesh. He's making an accounting of his soul, and he's going through his entire life. And he remembers this conversation that he had with Paro, and it haunts him. He realizes now on his deathbed that it was not right to talk like that. In retrospect, I see now that all that I imagined was terrible and bad and bitter was actually, in the end, all for my good. I now see Hashem in a light that I've never seen him before. I see now, looking back at my life, that everything that happened to me represented Hashem watching over me and maneuvering things. It all turned out for the best. A shepherd suddenly decides to move his sheep from one pasture to the other, and they don't understand, where's the shepherd schlepping us? What was wrong with over here? They don't know that the shepherd had seen a wolf lurking in the first pasture. When the sheep are at a beautiful pond and they're drinking the sweet water, and then all of a sudden the shepherd says, up, right, it's time to go. And he takes them to a place where there's no pond, there's nothing to drink, and they're thinking, Meshugana, what's he doing? What is this? Musical fields. The sheep, who have no intelligence, do not understand. But the shepherd, if he is a good shepherd, faithfully takes care of his flock. He cares for them. He loves them. He empathizes with them. And that's what Yaakov Avinu understood now. Hashem has been my shepherd. Yaakov did have a difficult life, but now he realizes that the whole thing, Esav, Lavan, Dinah, and the sale of Yosef, and everything else, now that he sees he's in Egypt and he sees why it happened, he can say, I see now that I made a mistake. I was like the sheep who do not understand what the shepherd is doing. Now I understand that Hashem was guiding me and shepherding me all along. He was only interested in my welfare. It was at this moment that Yaakov first saw Hashem as a shepherd. When the lamb strays from the flock, the shepherd comes and chases him back because he sees that there's a wolf lurking in the background. The shepherd knows that if the lamb wanders any further, he might get bitten by a fox or killed by a wolf. Sometimes the shepherd must even hit the sheep with his staff. There are times when the sheep wants to take an extra drink of water, but it's time to leave, and the sheep cannot figure out why the shepherd won't let him drink water anymore. Sometimes the sheep wants to graze a little longer in a specific space, but the shepherd knows that it would be dangerous for them to stay any longer. The sheep do not always understand the shepherd. Yaakov calls Hashem the one who shepherds me. Yakov says, I can now understand and comprehend the nature of what he was doing to me all these years. He was being my shepherd, and he always had my benefit at heart. He was never cruel or mean. Rather than depriving me, he was saving me. Says Rabbi Frand, how fitting it is that when, I'm going to share my screen now, that when Yakov refers to Hashem as a shepherd, okay, the word is not written in its full form. So what I mean by this is in Hebrew, sometimes words can be written without certain letters, but they still mean the same thing. So this is ordinarily how we would spell a shepherd. That's ro'eh. But when it's written in the Torah, over here, it's written without the vav, and it spells ra'ah, bad. Okay, so the shepherd and ro'eh and ra'ah are related. That's which we perceive as bad. Okay, that which we perceive as bad is actually what the ro'eh, what the shepherd, what Hashem, in his infinite, yet often humanly incomprehensible wisdom and in foresight, knows what's best for us. This insight, which Yakov gained on his deathbed, enabled him to be the first person to call Hashem a shepherd. And this then gave the precedent for David HaMelech to use the very same metaphor in the most famous of Tehillim, Mizmor LeDavid, Hashem ro'i lo achsar. Hashem is my shepherd, I shall not lack. And these 4 words encapsulate our entire lives. What does it mean? Hashem is my shepherd. Let's go back now to that job description that I read at the beginning. The shepherd is completely and totally in charge. The shepherd has one concern, and that is that his sheep are cared for as well as possible. Everything he does is for the good of the flock, for the advantage of the flock, for the betterment of the flock, to promote the health of the flock, to enable the flock to flourish endlessly. And the shepherd knows what he is doing. Hashem is not a consultant. The shepherd makes short-term decisions based on long-term goals. Why? Because sheep need to graze in pastures. So therefore, he needs to have a short-term plan of where they're going to graze today based on a long-term plan of where they're going to be moving to in the future. I'm going to give you an example of how this played out in my life. So brief medical and personal history, if people are watching or listening who don't know this. So I am BRCA positive, which means that I'm at an increased risk of breast and ovarian cancer, as well as some other cancers, chas v'shalom. When I had breast cancer, I had chemotherapy. Then I had a bilateral mastectomy. And when I was at my oncologist getting the result of the biopsy after the operation, she said to me, right, she said, when are we removing your ovaries? And I said, what? Now, because ovarian cancer is such a difficult cancer, dangerous cancer, and because it's usually detected only when it's quite far progressed in, as a matter of course, for BRCA, people who are BRCA positive, their ovaries are removed at a certain age. And I begged her and I said to her, I said, please, I still want to get married and have children. And she hummed and hawed and she said, okay. She said, she let me keep them. She gave me a date. It was 3.5 years in the future. And she said, now, will you get a move on? I said to her, I've been dating for nearly, it was over 20 years at that stage. I said, I'm trying. Anyway, although she said 3.5 years, actually, halakhically, it was not so clear that I was allowed to actually postpone the operation because the risk of ovarian cancer, chas v'shalom, was so great. It was not halakhically, there was then the risk of pikuach, there was pikuach nefesh, a danger to my life, and I had to speak to many rabbis and get upset that I was allowed to actually postpone. But about a year and a little bit later, we got results that although they had tried to protect my fertility during the chemotherapy, they had not succeeded, and I'd lost my fertility and I couldn't have children. So 10 days later, I had to have the operation. And I remember thinking at the time, Hashem, I don't understand. And it's not my, I'm not expected to understand. I've just got to do my best to serve you from here, from this point. But I said, Hashem, couldn't you have just let me live in hope for another 2.5 years? And I was a tevya here. Would it spoil some vast eternal plan if I could have just lived in hope for another 2.5 years? Because I have to tell you, what had got me going, kept me going through those 20 plus years in Shidduchim, was knowing Yeshua's Hashem keheref ayin, that Hashem's salvation can come in a flash. And so every birthday, I would think to myself, yes, but by next birthday, I could be married and even holding a baby of my own in my arms. At every Rosh Hashanah, I said, this could be the year. But now I didn't even have that hope. And it's not easy. It's not easy waking up in the morning without being buoyed by hope. And I just said, Hashem, would it spoil some vast eternal plan if I could have just lived for another 2.5 years with hope? But Hashem's the shepherd. The day came that my oncologist had said was the deadline. And I knew from my discussions, both with many medical professionals and with rabbis, that there is no ways at that date I would have not had a leg to stand on, not from a medical perspective, not from a halachic perspective, to postpone the operation at all. And it was smack bang in the middle of COVID. Now, let me explain what that meant. When I received the results, my sister was in Cape Town visiting my dad. My mama died a few years prior, and she could extend her ticket. My sister lives in Australia, so that she could be with me for the operation and a few days afterwards while I was recovering. That stage, my dad was still alive, and he was there when I continued recovering. During COVID, my sister lives in Perth, and their borders were shut. My sister would not have been able to travel. My father by that stage had died. Not only that, because I was immunocompromised, I was in isolation for 19 months during COVID, so people in the community wouldn't have been able to come and visit me. In retrospect, my sister, even if she could have traveled, it probably wouldn't have been a good idea for her to travel because she could have put me at risk. Which meant I would have been gone through this extremely emotionally painful and also physically painful operation without any close support. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, Baruch Hashem, I had the operation when I did. I had thought, Hashem, would it spoil some, vast eternal plan? But Hashem is the shepherd, and he had the long-term goal in mind. When I was Googling the job description of a shepherd, I came across of how to care for sheep. And there was a whole long list of things that are actually toxic to sheep. Buttercups, ferns, chocolate, which we'll get to. And I also came across that it said that many sheep, as they get older, that they wear down their teeth. They might lose their teeth, so it's hard for them to chew the grass properly, and then it leads to problems in digestion. So the shepherd needs to soak pellets of hay for them instead. Now, does the sheep know why it can't graze and has to have these hay pellets, these pellets instead? No, the sheep doesn't know. Nor was the sheep expected to understand. And that's so important to remember. Now, I mentioned that there's also a list of all these things that are toxic to sheep. These buttercups, these ferns, this lilac, this chocolate. No wonder if I have a warm, fuzzy feeling about shepherds if they're prepared to share their chocolates with their flock. But now sometimes to get to a pasture that's got good grass and doesn't have any of these toxic plants, the sheep have to scramble over rough terrain. Now, if you had to ask the sheep their opinion of this, they'd say, lousy idea. You know, why do we have to, it's hard to scramble over this rough terrain? But the shepherd knows what's good for them. And he knows that taking them over this rough turf is going to take them to this magnificent pasture. Now, it doesn't mean that it's easy to scramble over that rough terrain. You know, it's painful. It's painful to walk over that rough terrain. And we collectively as a nation are scrambling over very, very, very rough terrain at the moment. And it's painful. And yes, we are human. It's okay to cry out in pain. And I'm not negating any of the pain. And I'm not making light of any challenges. But we have to know that Be'ezus Hashem, we will get to magnificent pastures. But you might say, okay, but it's one thing when we're all scrambling over rough terrain. But what about when it seems to be only me? What about when it seems like the rest of the flock are all drinking sweet water? Why can't I have the same sweet grass as all the other sheep? Well, sheep can't eat lilacs and chocolate. Apparently, the best February the 14th treat is an alfalfa cube. For female sheep, that is. Give that to a male sheep and you'll give him kidney stones. When King David says, Hashem is my shepherd, it means he cares about me individually. His only concern is about me, is about my unique, eternal well-being and success. And Hashem acts accordingly. We have to know and remember that Hashem loves us. He wants to have a relationship with us. He wants us to succeed. Hashem had no reason to create us, but he did because he wants to just bestow goodness, kindness on us. Rav Munk notes that when Yakov speaks about Hashem, he speaks about it in present tense. He says, Hashem who shepherds me. Because Yakov understands that Hashem is always present, always loving, always guiding us, with us, holding us every step of the way. What does it mean? That means there's nothing that Hashem wants more than what's good for me. I may think I know what's good for me, but the truth is I don't know what my neshama was sent to this world to accomplish. So I don't know what my unique contribution is. Therefore, I'm not in a position to really know what's good for me. I'm going to share an incident that led to a certain thought process. And I'm not saying what she said is the truth, and I'm not saying that this is reality, my thoughts is actually the reality of what happened, but I'm just using it as an example of how we really don't know and how there's so many things that come into play. So about 16 or 17 years ago, I was suffering from very bad food intolerances. And I got to a point I could basically eat fish and green vegetables, and that was it, and nothing was helping. So eventually I tried the alternative route, and I went to a body talk practitioner, somebody who does the tapping. Now, I wasn't a believer. After I went, I was a believer, but I was not into any of this alternate stuff. But anyway, I hadn't even told her the issue. And then when she was like tapping, and all of a sudden my arm was moving slightly, all of a sudden like my arm flung out, and she said to me, wow, talk about intolerance. She said, I just tested you for wheat. But anyway, after about 3 sessions of tapping, she suddenly looked up and she said to me, Devoro, we're going back to your father's mother and the angst she felt when leaving home to get married. She tapped a little bit more and said to me, leaky gut syndrome. And she said, I've done all I can for you. And she sent me off to a homeopath to help me. Now, I didn't go into it. I wasn't interested in going to pastoral life regression or any of these things. I didn't go into it. But I thought about it. And again, I'm not saying this is or this isn't. It's just a thought process. What if my great-grandmother, in her angst for leaving home, had lashed out against Hashem that she had to leave home to get married? And what if my neshama, my tikkun, part of my tikkun for my neshama, my rectification for my neshama, was to come back to the world and rectify her lashing out? Okay, and because of that I have to remain single for so many years. I heard a shiur many years ago. If my memory serves correctly, it was, but after chemo, don't bank on it. But I think it was the Rama Mipano, who's an Italian Kabbalist, and he said that our neshama actually gets to choose its challenges, that it's going to come down to the world and experience. So now Hashem has given me what is the ultimate best for my neshama, which according to some opinions, my neshama actually chose. And I'm going to lash out at Hashem and complain. Again, I'm not saying that was really it, but just something for us to understand that we really don't know what's good for us. But Hashem does. He knows what's good for us, and he's absolutely invested totally in our success. And he has all our needs in mind every single second of the day. And again, I'm not negating pain. I'm not negating challenges. But Hashem is in charge, okay? And he knows what he's doing. I, like the sheep, am incapable of comprehending. Sometimes I've got to go through rougher times to get to beautiful times. That's just the way it is. So what does it mean? It means that I have what I need. Okay, is it best for the sheep to struggle over this roughy terrain to get to the magnificent pastures? Yes, it does, but they don't understand it. But if not for navigating this difficult turf, they wouldn't get to that magnificent pasture. Now, there's a big caveat here, which is a shiur in itself. This does not mean that we cannot daven for things or for things to change. This doesn't mean that we don't do hishtadlus, put in an effort to make things change. This doesn't mean that we don't do chesed or give tzedakah because we say, oh, somebody's suffering, but that's fine. They're meant to suffer, so their lives are perfect, and who am I to mess with perfection? This doesn't mean that we condone atrocities. But how does it translate into our current situation? When we daven, we should pour our hearts out, and beg Hashem, please, please, please. And yes, we can feel this raw, visceral pain of everything that's going on. And we should put in hishtadlus in whatever form that is, for different people with different things. For some, maybe that's donating money. For others, those in Israel, maybe it's going to help the displaced people. Maybe it's serving in the IDF or writing to Congress or learning Torah. Whatever it is for you, and there's so much we can do. But the rest of the time, to sit scrolling through news feeds and getting anxious and despondent and depressed, why should I? Hashem is the shepherd, and he knows what's best. That said, what I've just said is extremely, extremely difficult, really difficult. I've heard it quoted in the name of Rav Yisrael Salanta. And you must understand, when Rav Yisrael Salanta does not speak in hyperbole, I mean, I might say, I ate 1 million calories in cheesecake over Shavuos. Actually, that's probably not exaggeration. That's probably pretty close to the truth. But when Rav Yisrael Salanta said something, he did not exaggerate. And Rav Yisrael Salanta said that the balance and the relationship that we are meant to establish with tefillah is the most difficult thing that a human being is expected to do. But Hashem also doesn't ask us to do the impossible. So the balance is something like this. My mom, Alav Shalom, she was in hospital once, and she'd gone, they'd taken her down to have an x-ray because things were very precarious and they needed to check something out. And so I was waiting for her, and I was saying TEHILLIM. And there was a new nurse on duty. By now, all of the nurses knew me and my TEHILLIM by then, but she didn't. And she came and she said to me, do you pray in Jewish? So I explained to her that I was Jewish and I was praying in Hebrew. And she started asking me all these questions. She'd actually been to a Jewish funeral once and was asking me all the different questions about a funeral. And I chatted to her for a bit. My mum came out and we went back to the ward. Now, and as I said, they weren't happy with the results. Doctors weren't with the results of the x-rays. And she came to us and she said, I want to tell you something. She said, you mustn't listen to what doctors say. She said, I want to share my story. And she said she got married very young and she couldn't have children. And she tried absolutely everything. And the doctors had said, no, there was nothing you could do. And she said she cried so much that she actually ruined her eyes. And she took off her glasses. She was wearing dark glasses and she was colored, so I hadn't seen it before. But when she took them off, when somebody's punched in their eye, they've got like black all black underneath here. And her eyes were totally black like that, like somebody had punched them, that she must have permanently burst her capillaries. And I remember thinking, I wonder if that's what the Torah means when it said that Leah's eyes were tender from crying so much. But anyway, she said it was just before her 20th wedding anniversary, and her husband actually said he wanted a divorce because he wanted to have children and he did not want to adopt. So he said, right, if you can't give me children, I want a divorce. And she said she went into her room and she said, she prayed and she said, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, you are the only one who can save this marriage. Give me a child. And she said, a few weeks later, I was feeling sick and I went to the doctor. And she said, and now I have this. And she whipped out her phone and showed us a picture of her gorgeous 3-year-old daughter. I commented to my mom afterwards that my mom and I daven, but at the same time, we know that Hashem is a shepherd, and we know that everything he does is for the best. And we know that every tefillah is answered, but we also know that it's Hashem. Sometimes he will use that tefillah in a different way, not for what we daven for. Or sometimes he will answer the tefillah in generations' time. Or sometimes the answer is no. But it's always for the ultimate good. But that nurse didn't think so. She knew she had a problem and only God could fix it. And that's how we have to be when we daven. Hashem, give me a child. I think we can say please. But when we step out of davening, after we've poured our heart out, after we've asked Hashem, then we have to know that Hashem is our shepherd and everything is as it should be. Now make no mistake. It's hard times. It's painful times. We're living in a surreal world when monsters can carry out barbaric acts of utter depravity and the world blames the victims. When the Me Too movement can cancel Picasso, but when Jewish women are raped, there's barely a sound out of anyone. That Ivy League heads say calling for genocide depends on context. We're living in a surreal world. How do we maintain our serenity? When King David composed Perek 23 of Tehillim, we're told he was inspired by 2 different events. Therefore, there are 2 separate themes, 2 separate ways that we can interpret the words. And while we don't have time to go through it tonight, you can actually go through it word by word and see the different meaning depending on context. This is a time where it actually does depend on context. But the first interpretation is that this refers to when the Jews had left Egypt and they were in the desert and Hashem cared and provided for their every need. So if you go through the verses, you'll see there how David HaMelech speaks about the man that rained down and tasted like whatever they wanted, and that their clothes, they actually didn't need to ever, their clothes actually grew with them and they never needed to wash it, lest you worry about the odor after it not being washed for 40 years. We're told that the clothes gave off such a beautiful smell, it gave Chanel No. 5 a run for its money. Even Shiftecha Umashantecha, that we usually translate and explain as rod and staff, is actually Torah Shebechsav and Torah Sheba'al Peh. It's actually referring to the written Torah and the oral Torah. So the whole perek, the whole psalm is David waxing lyrical, I guess literally, about how Hashem cared and provided for Klal Yisrael's every need in the desert. Hashem is the ultimate shepherd. However, we usually go through, know the capital by the perek by its second interpretation, that it was written by David when he was fleeing from Shaul Melech, that King Saul wanted to kill him, and he's running for his life. And very briefly, I just want to mention some of the events that this running for his life entailed. Now, please keep in mind, when we're speaking about Shaul HaMelech and David HaMelech, when we're speaking about Saul and David, we're speaking about great, great, great people. This is not some petty little disagreement, some ego, something like that. Saul did something, and Hashem had decreed that that the kingship should be taken away from him. However, this didn't mean that it was going to be taken away from him from the spot. It just meant he would still retain the monarchy, but it wouldn't continue through his line. So his son would not then become king. Now, Saul believed that David was rebelling against him. And remember, he's the king. So as a king, Saul had a right, if not a responsibility, to actually put David to have him put to death. Now remember that Saul is also David's father-in-law. I can actually just see the conversation now. Michal saying to David, why do we always go to your parents for Pesach? But anyway, one day David's playing the harp and Shaul throws a spear at him, and Mrs. David thinks this is probably not the best time to discuss going into the family business, and he escapes. I do know I'm leaving out a lot. I'm just giving you the abridged version, but he runs to the city of Nov and he asks them for food, and they give him food and they give him a sword. He then goes to the Plishtim. Now, you might be thinking, why does he go into the Plishtim? Aren't they his enemies? And it's true, they were enemies, but they were also Saul's enemy. So I guess his feeling was, your enemy is your friend, but no such luck. And they want to attack him. And David feigns madness and escapes. He realizes that his family, because he's a wanted man, his family might be at risk. So he takes his family and he goes to Moab. If you remember, David's great-grandmother was Ruth, and she was from Moab. So he thinks that the Moabites will protect his family, but he leaves his family under their protection. But once he leaves, the king of Moab kills his entire family, except for one brother who was elsewhere. Gad Hanavi, the prophet Gad, comes and tells him to go to Yehuda because that's where they are his tribesmen. Meanwhile, Shaul wipes out the city of Nov because of their complicity in giving David food and arms. Aviasa, the son of the Kohen Agadol of Nov, manages to escape, and he joins David and tells him what has happened. Then just think for a moment how David must be thinking, and feeling, and how it must feel that at least, even if it is indirectly, but that he was indirectly responsible for the murder, not only the murder of his family, but of an entire city. He then puts his life in danger. He's in hiding, but he sees that there's a city in Yehuda that's being attacked. So although it's dangerous for him to come out, he said, I can't stand by, and he puts his life in danger, and he goes and he saves the city of Yehuda. Now, Aviasa had brought the Urim V'Turim with him, which was this breastplate that the Kohen HaGadol used to wear, which could be used almost as a form of prophecy. And David asks the Urim V'Turim, like asking Hashem, like through the Urim V'Turim, will they protect me, the city who I've just risked my life to save? And says no. The Urim V'Turim says no. Even though you've just risked your life to save them and they might have been wiped out, no, you need to run. So he can't count on them to protect them from Saul. So he runs to Ziph, also in Yehuda, but they go and they tell Shaul, they tell him exactly where David is. Saul comes and is closing in on David when he hears the news that the Plishtim are attacking. So Saul has to make a decision. Does he carry on pursuing David, or does he go back and protect his borders from the Plishtim? And he goes back and he protects his borders. So, as I said, this is an abridged version. So Rashi teaches us that David now composes this parak. He's running away from Shaul. He's on the brink of death. He's in this midbar of Ziv, and Hashem performs a miracle, and he's saved by Hashem. So now, David gratefully bursts out into song, describing the magnitude of his trust in Hashem. Hashem is my shepherd, I shall not lack. Really? I could think of a few things you're lacking. Your safety, your family, a stable, high-speed Wi-Fi connection. But David understood that if he needed something, he would have it. And David carries on. He leads me to lush meadows with tranquil waters. No, David. No. You're in the midbar. You're in the wilderness, the desert. Gam ki elech, though I walk through the valley of a shadow by death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. David, you've got a death warrant on your head. How can you say this? Imagine a child screaming that there's a boogeyman in the closet, and the parent comes and comforts the child. Now, the child still believes the boogeyman's in the closet. The child, trust me, that child's not going to let that parent put off the light and go back to the parent's room in a hurry. Yet the child is comforted and reassured just by the close proximity of the parent being there, even though the source of danger is still present. And that's what David says. And this is how David continues, verse after verse after verse, again, waxing lyrical about Hashem, the ultimate shepherd. Perhaps you might be thinking, Devora, you said David feigned madness to escape the Plishtim. Are you sure it was just feigned madness? Because this sounds quite delusional to me. He wasn't. But David too lived in a surreal world. Just think about it. His own father-in-law wanted to kill him. He takes his family to his relatives, and his relatives kill his family. He asks Noah for food, which was Pekah Nefesh, which was to save his life, and Saul comes and kills. Noah was a city of Kohanim, of righteous people. He risks his life to save a city, but they won't protect him. His tribesmen turn him in. How did David maintain his sanity, but how did he maintain his serenity in a surreal world? Perhaps we can suggest the following. David didn't only learn about Hashem being a shepherd from Yakov Avinu, he learned something else as well. In the first verse of this week's Parsha, it says, Yakov lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, and the days of Yakov, the years of his life, were 147 years. Though Yakov spent a considerable time of his life in Egypt, it's 17 years. The Torah doesn't elaborate on it at all. It's because those years passed in tranquility. In contrast to the years in Eretz Israel, where his service of Hashem was through trials and pain and suffering. Think of how many parshas the Torah spends telling us of all the troubles with Yosef, with Dinah, with everything, because all of that was pain and suffering. The Torah, which wants to provide us with a proper yardstick of life, teaches us that primary avodas Hashem, the primary way that we serve Hashem, it's achieved through difficulty, through overcoming obstacles. And if you think about it, it's easy to have emunah b'tochen, to love Hashem, when things are going swimmingly. But what when it's not? But it's more than that. We said that David had two interpretations for this, two things in mind when he was composing this. One was Klal Yisrael in the Midbar, the Jewish nation in the desert after they'd left Egypt, and the other was him fleeing for his life. He uses the same words, the same expressions. How is that possible? So I've had many blood tests in my life. This actually started long before chemo. Just for various reasons, I've always had to have lots of blood tests. And my earliest memory of my first blood test that I remember, I must have been about 4 or 5, and I was screaming blue murder. Feel sorry for my mother. Although this has got, it's got nothing to do with the SHIUR, but I need to feel vindicated. I screamed and screamed and screamed and screamed. The nurse was trying to draw blood, and eventually the pediatrician came and took the blood, and I didn't say a peep, make a sound. And now decades later, I know that I have very bad veins. They collapse. They will either get my vein or they won't. And if they don't get my vein, I still want to scream blue murder. So it was the nurse, not me. But anyway, let's get back to now that I feel vindicated, let's get back to the blood test. It was painful. It was painful. The fact that my mom was there was very comforting. And I still remember she bought me this cute little bunny toy afterwards that said, "You make me hop, hop, hoppity." But you know what? I would have rather not had the toy and then had the blood test. Fast forward many, many years. And I was in the middle of chemo and my blood counts kept on dropping. And I was actually meant to have chemo, but because my blood counts, the neutrophils and the white blood cells that protect you from infections were so low, I was actually admitted to hospital instead. I had to go into isolation because the counts were so low. And I was in hospital for a few days. They gave me injections to help promote the production of the neutrophils, of the white blood cells. And a few days they improved and they discharged me. The blood results said that my bloods were okay for me to go home. And my oncologist looked at the blood results and said, "You know what? And they're fine. Come in for chemo on Monday." And she said, "You don't need to repeat the blood test." She said, "We'll go on this." Now, that was the Thursday or the Friday. And I was just worried. I just felt, because my blood, by that stage, my bloods were dropping all the time. And I just thought, usually you have the blood test the day before and you're going for chemo the next day. And I was just nervous. And I said, I don't care that my oncologist said I don't have to have a blood test. And I don't care if medical aid is not going to pay because she hasn't sent me. I'm going to go in and have a blood test on the Sunday. So to know, because I didn't want to rely on the results from the Thursday or the Friday, what it was. So I willingly went in to have a blood test. Was it painful? Yes, it was very painful because the phlebotomist was in a bad mood. So when I went in, she said to me, "We're not open to the public today. You can't come in." So I said to her, "I'm a chemo patient. I've got chemo tomorrow." So she grudgingly let me in because she had to. That's the rules. You can come as chemo patients come in on Sunday. And then I said to her, please use a butterfly. So they always use a butterfly with me. It's a thin needle because I have such bad veins. And during chemo, I had like no veins. And she said, "I never use butterflies." So she shouldn't use a butterfly. It was so painful. But I understood that that's what I needed. And I really did need it because the blood test came back and my blood counts were too low for chemotherapy. Had I not had that blood test and gone in the following day and had chemotherapy, it could have killed me, Chas v'shalom. So just in case anybody has any notion about trusting doctors rather than Hashem, a child gets some comfort. My mom was with me. I got a toy. But a higher level, the level of an adult, is that I go in willingly because I understand that this is the best thing for me. David HaMelech, who was spiritually mature, understood that if sitting tranquilly was bad for him, then he could trust that Hashem would get him up and going and give him a life of turmoil. And if difficulties were bad for him, he knew that Hashem would put an end to it. So when he says, "Shiftecha u'mashantecha," your rod and your staff, they comfort me, I see what it means is because I see your hand in my life. I see you watching me, guiding me wherever I am, whatever I'm doing. It's all for my good. I may not understand why, and it may not take away the pain, but you are my shepherd and you have my best interest at heart. And so it's more than just that there's a boogeyman in the closet. And I know that I'm going through difficult times, but you're with me, so I'm comforted. It's more than that. David understood that if there's a boogeyman in the closet, it's because Hashem put the boogeyman in the closet, and that means that he gets comfort from knowing that it's the best thing for him. David, who understood this from the depths of his heart, looks at the story of the Jews in the desert and his own personal life story and says, I don't see a difference. Yes, it's true. The one included man that tasted like fine Swiss chocolate and freebies of French perfume. And the other includes pain and challenges and turmoil. But in terms of the love, in terms of the relationship, in terms of the connection, in terms of the fact that Hashem is shepherding me, loving me, guiding me, holding me tight, hugging me every single moment, it's all the same. I don't see a difference. Tehillim, as part of Tanakh, are not biblical stories put to lyrics. They are applicable to every single person in every generation. So how can we tap into the serenity? I'll answer with a story, which is probably apocryphal, but the message isn't. There was once an actor who was famous for his one-man reading of the classics, and he would have these one-man shows, and he would always end it with this amazing rendition of Psalm 23. And after he said it, he would always get a standing ovation because the words he said, the imagery, it was just so beautiful. And one night after as he's about to start his reading of the Psalm, an elderly gentleman at the back of the audience puts up his hand and he says, "Do you mind if tonight," he said, "if I say the Psalm?" So the actor's a bit taken aback, but he says, "Sure, come on stage, go ahead." And the man, in a very thick Eastern European accent, stumbling over the words, starts reciting the words of the Psalm. And at the end, there's no standing ovation, but instead there's just the sound of weeping. Everybody was crying. He had brought them to tears. And the actor turned and he said to the man, he said, "What's your secret?" He said, "I've always got a standing ovation, but I've never said it so powerfully that I've brought an audience to tears." And the old man smiles and he says, "There's a difference between you and me. It's true. You may know the Psalm, but I know the shepherd." Okay. Ladies, I'll unmute you for if you want to ask any questions now. Just a reminder, this will be uploaded to the YouTube channel. If you are watching on YouTube now, please actually subscribe and give me a thumbs up. Apparently it helps the algorithm. And YouTube's actually put some adverts on my one SHIUR, and I was so excited. I was like, I'm going to monetize it. I can get some money from this now. And I went on, but you actually need 1,000 subscribers before they will actually hand the money over to you. Instead, they keep the money. So just by subscribing, giving me a thumbs up if you like the SHIUR, assuming you like the SHIUR Be'ezras Hashem, it helps the algorithm and it helped me Be'ezras Hashem at some point in the future to actually monetize this on YouTube, just a way you can help. So thank you. If you'd like to unmute, if anybody's got any questions, you want to unmute yourself, anything, I can stop recording. If you don't want me to record you asking questions, I'm going to stop the recording.